Gee, Smalls. I suppose you don't even know who the babe is either. It's plug. What? Chewing tobacco?
Backy, man.
What do you do with it? You're killing me, Smalls.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. It's time to do a little comic book creator retrospective. Today we're going to talk about Louise Simonson. We're a man down. Unfortunately, Breen wasn't able to join us, but we do have award-winning comic book editor, and we got writer Joe Corallo, someone who's been on a panel with Louise Simonson.
Yep.
You've actually met the woman, who everyone says is like the sweetest person in the world.
Oh my God, yes. She's no, she's incredibly sweet and far too humble. And I think anyone that's met her would probably say the same things.
Well, especially once we go through her accolades, I knew a lot of what she did, but I was like, oh my goodness, this like the amount that she did at Marvel and then DC, like the breadth of work as a writer is absolutely phenomenal, and certainly doesn't get the credit she deserves. But absolutely. Weezie is one of the most beloved figures in all of comic books. Whenever you hear anyone speak about her, it's only nice things. She starts out pretty early here, Joe, 1979, or I'm sorry, I think it's actually 1974. She starts working at Warren Publishing as an editor. She works her way up to senior editor before departing in 1979. She worked on some high-profile books there. I think Vampirella might have been one of them, and some other stuff like that.
Yeah, creepy, eerie, like a bunch of horror books she got to work for. And yeah, so she started there and then ended up at Marvel in 1980. She was hired by Jim Shooter. And the way it worked then was to get her a portfolio of titles. Jim went around to every editor and was like, all right, I need a book from you that you're willing to take off your plate to give to Louise. And all of the editors, rightfully so, you know, you're not going to be like, oh, let me give up my favorite book or a high selling book or something really big to Louise, this new person here. But the one person that did do that was Jim Salicrup. Jim had just taken the reins on XMen for the Dark Phoenix saga from Roger Stern, previously being Roger Stern's assistant. And Jim was mostly doing the Avengers core Marvel characters, you know, the Avengers books and Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, those books. But he was also doing X-Men. And he thought, you know what? I have so much going on with these books. I kind of would rather keep that Avengers cluster together. And X-Men's becoming such a big hit. I think it would be great to give this to someone to really cultivate that book and take it in, you know, a strong direction. And Jim Shooter was thrilled. He was like, "Oh my God, you'll give Louise? Oh, she's gonna love it." And you know, it was this whole thing, and you know, that started. You know, it's just funny how history and all these things work, and all these like little decisions that get made along the way. If Jim didn't do that, there's a chance the X-Men might not be the same book it is today.
Absolutely, because she ends up being the publisher on Uncanny X-Men for almost 4 years, from issue 137 to 182.
Yeah.
Not exactly an unsuccessful time in the era of Uncanny X-Men. A lot of things are happening at that point. And she was certainly instrumental in helping Chris Claremont along. He's known for having about 15 plots and subplots all going at one time, keeping them all kind of in order and keeping the stories flowing. It ends up being one of the is it the greatest run in comic book history? Chris Claremont's X-Men, probably, maybe it's up there.
No, I mean it's up there, and obviously the book got insanely popular with her on the book. She edited under Louise Jones. That was her name when she was doing that. Mm-hmm. So just in case some people are like, "What are you talking about, Louise Simonson?" But I mean, she, Days of Future Past, God Loves Man Kills, and she was at the reins of that book in editorial as it was getting so popular that it got its first spinoff with New Mutants.
She was also the editor on that one. At the same time, she's also the editor for Conan the Barbarian from issue 114 to 148, another high-profile project that ends up doing quite well. So yeah, she makes an immediate impact as soon as she goes over to Marvel as an editor.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. It's crazy because she does that for years, and then she ends up leaving editorial to pursue writing, and that's when she starts going by Louise Simonson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and she gets a little book. We see it every now and again. Unfortunately, we don't see this a lot, but I believe her first time full-time writing gig at Marvel is Power Pack.
Yeah,
this is basically introducing some younger heroes. Certainly, I think she ends up doing that one. Is it like 40 issues?
At least she was on that book for a while, but co-creating that, and the funny thing about Power Pack is you can kind of tell the age of a diehard Marvel fan based on if they prefer like the early adventures of Rick Jones, Power Pack, New Warriors, Runaways, or like the current incarnation of Champions, and you can kind of, like Miles Morales and characters like that, you can kind of be like, oh, so you're probably about this age, based on that. So like, if you're like, pushing 50, you might be a bigger Power Pack fan than like a New Warriors fan, for example, or something like that.
Absolutely. And, so she quit her very successful job at editorial, becomes a full-time writer, and really as a writer, where she hits it big is there was I don't know, I guess they didn't think the writer for X Factor was going to be able to meet a deadline. She had some ideas. She submits her script. The writer, I believe it's Layman, ends up Leighton, I'm sorry, meeting the deadline. But when the editorial staff saw the ideas, he ends up dropping X Factor anyway, and she becomes a full-time creator. Issue number 6 creates Apocalypse. By the time she's done, Walt Simonson, her husband, joins the creative team as the penciler on issue number 10. We get Angel becoming Archangel. So many really cool things that are lasting to this day. There's very few X-Men villains that are bigger than Apocalypse. I mean, he's basically a Marvel villain at this time, at this point.
No, she co-created Apocalypse with Butch Guice, and although Walt really drew the character for most of the time, both Walt and Weezie are very humble about all of that. Particularly Walt, is like, no, that's Butch's co-creation with Weezie. I think he only did an issue or something like that with Apocalypse, but yeah, it's they went on to do a phenomenal run on X Factor. And we just have him return in X-Men Legends, where they did a little 2-issue story with Ship and Apocalypse. So you got to see him do Apocalypse, or at least Walt do Apocalypse a little bit more, and Archangel and all those great characters. Yeah, no, that was all great. And then when you look at it, it's like, okay, so she had her hand in that on top of being involved in Mutant Massacre, Fall of the Mutants, Inferno, and Extinction Agenda. Absolutely. In fact, she's the one that when she saw Chris Claremont's Mutant Massacre storyline was like, this should be a crossover. Like this is bigger than just Uncanny X-Men. You need to cross this out amongst many titles. Obviously, Mutant Massacre is one of the most well-known, beloved X-Men crossover events of all time. Sure. No, not possible without Weezie. Yeah, I mean, every one of those crossover events has their fans. Mutant Massacre is big. Fall of Mutants is probably my favorite. A lot of people's favorite is Extinction Agenda, and she's had her hands in all that. She got to come back to it with X Factor Forever as well, which was I want to say like early 2000s. I forgot exactly. It's been a while since I read that one, but that was a good one too. And getting to do all that stuff at Marvel, I know we're getting over to this. She was, a key contributor to X-Men. And unlike basically any creator in comics history here, I mean, we see this, and then she goes to take over, New Mutants as well. And now she co-creates Cable.
with Rob Liefeld.
Yeah, and another big character who's been on the big screen is one of the very. Cable is one of a very small handful of characters who's an X-Men character who's had a successful solo book. It's like Wolverine, Deadpool, and after those two, I think you would put Cable. Like that's very impressive.
Absolutely, all these creations, I think it maybe is because that Louise and Walter are so humble about it. You don't sit there and go like, oh my goodness. Apocalypse, one of the greatest villains in X-Men history, one of the greatest villains in Marvel history. Cable, one of the more interesting, newer character developments. Obviously, was a breakout star on his own, and the revolutionary change with Archangel and being a key contributor to all these crossovers. And before that, a key contributor to that enormous run of Claremont. The X-Men are like intrinsically, associated with Louise Simonson. Yep. The fact that she had so much to do with the ongoing success. When that was essentially the franchise in comics. It was bigger than Batman. Oh, yeah.
There was a time, not too long after this. I mean, she ends up leaving before, really blew up, and X-Men ended up being, if you took X-Men out of Marvel, it would have been like the fourth largest like comics publisher alone in like the North America. But she ends up making that transition over to DC, and again, this is like unlike anyone else. It's like, can you imagine someone who had not only their hands in one of the highest points of X-Men, then she has her hands in one of the highest points of Superman.
Yes. You don't see Superman in the news often, and I remember seeing this. I would have been just becoming a teenager. Death of Superman was on like CNN when CNN was just like normal news. Like it was a news event, and obviously she came in 1991, starts writing Superman, the Man of Steel. I believe it's like an 8-year run. Like all of her runs are like significant. She never like goes in there for like a few issues here or there. It always ends up being a big run. And obviously one of the chief architects of the Death of Superman, which ends up being this enormous commercial success and brings all these new eyes in on DC Comics when they needed the publicity and they needed a bump.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and her contributions to the Death and Return of Superman are huge. She did a lot of the emotional threads through the Wake and things like that to really sell this death. Like she really tackled like what Lois and the Kents were going through. And this is an interesting story too. The issue she did that the Clintons are addressing, they're speaking at the Wake for Superman, that had to go to print before the election results were in. Like the election didn't happen. They had to go to print, and they made that gamble, and it was the Simonsons.
I hope you're right.
Yeah. And it was the Simonsons. There was, apparently editorial was okay with it, but, because they had to make a call, and the Simonsons were like, this is, we think this is what's going to happen, and they were right. And, but there's an alternate reality where, they put that out and it was, George Bush Sr. or Perot that should have been doing it, and it was the Clintons. So it's interesting that they were able to do that.
And she also ends up introducing what becomes one of the worst superhero movies of all time that I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. She introduces the character Steel in Adventures of Superman 500. Obviously, it's Shaquille O'Neal ends up being the Steel on the big screen. I think he went over to the LA Lakers because he was going to be a movie star. He done Blue Chips. He done like a Genie movie, and then he did Steel. That was about his movie career.
Yeah.
But, so bad.
it was really bad. But
it's a good character.
No,
it's not her fault.
No, it's not her fault. Character is great. That was one of the stronger characters in terms of a character who like possessed, sort of like the heart of Superman with someone like Steel in those issues leading up to the return. It's interesting because then you have Dan Jurgens, who's doing a character who we all know is the villain, And Louise had told me at a convention, basically, the way they were doing it was Louise was taking Clinton seriously, and Dan was trying to make him like a joke. So they do these things where, like you have this, somber moment where Bill's, and Hillary are speaking at this wake. And then, you skip ahead and Dan Jurgens is doing the cyborg Superman, who's like clearly a villain. Like he looks like a villain. And Bill Clinton's just kind of like, oh, you must be a hero. Here, let me give you everything you need to destroy the world. Like,
here's some information.
It's just, he's getting his pictures taken with cyborg Superman. Like it's funny. And she talked about how they would like kind of go back and forth on how they were, presenting Clinton during that run.
Yeah, obviously she ends up doing Steel until 1994. That's one of the characters that it's like one of those low key. It's kind of like a following. It's almost like a cult classic kind of character that everyone still likes to this day.
Yeah,
but certainly huge contributions to X-Men, huge contributions to Superman during her time at DC Comics in an enormous period. Obviously, with the death of Superman. She ends up returning to Marvel in 1999. Works on the Warlock series. I think Galactus the Devourer. Nothing ever quite as big as her time as editor on Uncanny, or maybe even her work on X Factor and kind of stuff like that. Unfortunately. Yeah,
and she still gets tapped to do things here and there. She recently did a Wonder Woman graphic novel. What was it? But yeah, you see her pop up. She, like we talked about before, the X-Men Legends. She did some stuff in there. She gets different gigs over time. Same thing with Walt. Walt's similarly. He'll every once in a while it's like, oh, we did this issue or something like that. But the Simonsons have been involved in so many big things over the years, and I would think Weezie, just from like residuals alone on some of this stuff, is probably better off than quite a few other people in comics from being involved in so many massive successes. But between X-Men and Superman, and her involvement in both of those franchises just elevates her to just being one of the top architects in comics, not just writer, but architect. And there are very few people who can make that claim, that they were a top architect at the height of both a DC property and an X-Men and a Marvel property.
Yes, it's crazy. And then, like I said, you hate to see it. You always do these like celebration of women in comics, and it always feels like they kind of leave her out. You think it's because she's too humble and doesn't go out there and brag about herself and the accomplishments that she made, and like maybe some of the ceilings that she broke through.
Oh yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of that. I mean, when I spoke to her at a convention down in Camden, New Jersey a few years ago, she was telling me, she's like, oh, everyone's has those like banners, the banners behind their tables. And she's like, I don't think anyone would be interested in like, why would I bother having like a banner? And like, what would I even put on it? And I was like, what are you talking about?
Just put Apocalypse with his arms out. That'd be enough. Creator of Apocalypse.
I was like, yeah, between Apocalypse, Cable, Steel, you could put all those characters. I mean, of course, like why not? But yeah, no, she's incredibly kind and humble. I had the chance to edit an anthology. She did a story in with Tommy Lee Edwards. They were both fans of each other, and they had never gotten to work together before. So it was really nice to pair them together and to tell a cute little story. So yeah, I mean, she's an absolute legend in the business, a very accomplished writer and editor, someone who is proud of all her work. I remember once at it was Grasshopper Comics years ago, having her sign some things, including like Days of Future Past, and she takes the trade and she looks at it and she just goes like, oh, this was like just wonderful. I'm so glad I got to like be a part of this, and it was great working on this, like just like, and it's just very genuine and from the heart. You know, it's not like she's never come across as like, you know, like a carnival barker or something like that. Like, you know, which there's obviously a place for that, and that's also its own charm. But there's really something special about someone who's just that sweet and earnest and respectable in what they do.
It's crazy. It's like you think about people are always like, well, you know, creators don't get enough credit for what they've done. You're like, well, every time Uncanny X-Men, you've got you know, Days of Future Past is a movie, had a big part to do with that. Apocalypse led his own X-Men film. We certainly saw Archangel in that one. We got a Steel movie. You know, all these things. You know, obviously the creator of Cable was a major part in Deadpool #2.
Yeah.
So she's like all these like multi-million dollar, you know, performing characters and ideas that went onto the big screen. So like her influence goes far beyond comics at this point. There are people that love what Louise Simonson created and don't even realize that she's a lot of times like the person behind it.
Yeah, I mean, even Doomsday, I think the whole Superman office gets co-creator credits on that character.
Yeah. Obviously, they put in the death of Superman in the Batman versus Superman film, which I think was a terrible mistake. Should have been its own movie, but that wasn't her fault.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, they mine a lot of her stuff for you know, the DC animated films. They've done adaptations of Reign of the Superman and the Death of Superman and stuff like that. So all of that's also been.
Man, you need to make a banner for her. Like, I know you didn't want this, Louise, but we've got this banner, and actually we needed 2 banners. We got one banner for all your comic book stuff. We got another banner for all the stuff that they took and did other stuff with it.
No, seriously.
It's like it'll be quite the. That's crazy that you're like, oh, what would I even put on there? It's like, where would you start? I mean, if that's your angle, I got that one. But if you don't think you have anything that would be worth on a banner, like that's crazy. Just the amount of things she's created, and you love to see that where people remain humble, because you see so many times success really gets to people's heads, and it kind of changes them, or maybe they become less genuine versions of themselves. I guess you can only get screwed over so many times before you kind of get maybe cynical or bitter, but it feels like she never fell into that. And I imagine Walt has a big part to do with that. They seem like such a nice couple together. Oh yeah, no, they're wonderful together. And if you want, you know, Walt to smile, you know, if they're at a con together, like gush over Weezie, you know, like, oh, but you're married to the woman that created Apocalypse? That is amazing. Yeah. You're so lucky. You know, but yeah, it's good stuff. So really enjoyed this one. Louise Simonson. Weezie obviously is a legend within comic books. Really created so many things that are still with us to this day. You know, when you create something that's still there, well over 30 years later, you've created something really special. Yeah. No, absolutely. She's created some of the most interesting characters in comics. She even created, you know, Richter, who would go on to be in a relationship with Shatterstar and be a big part of Peter David's X Factor. So yeah, I mean, she's been involved in so many things. She's elevated so many stories by her presence there, and she's elevated just a lot of conventions and experiences by just being a wonderful person. And I can't believe it. Joe, you are an award-winning editor, but you've also edited a story by one of the greatest editors in comic book history. Yeah, no, I didn't have to do much. I can't believe she let you do that. Like, get out of here, Joe. You're not editing my story. No, but no, it was really good. I'm glad we got to do a panel on that at Baltimore Comic Con in 2018. And we got to do that after we won the Ringo Award for Best Anthology, which was nice. And Stuart Moore was on that panel too, and he's done quite a bit over at DC. So yeah, it was a good time. When you're the editor on someone's book, can you still ask for an autograph? Because I would have. Oh no, you can. I've done that. I've got I have. That's what I would have done. So, hey, Joe, I want to say thank you very much coming here, talk about Louise Simonson, give us some of your personal anecdotes and stories and memories of Louise. It was a lot of fun. Do you have any final words to say?
If you're not familiar with Louise Simonson, like, get on it. Like, you can pick up, her X Factor run. They have the Mutant Massacre Omnibus is coming back in print later this year. Snag that. If you're not into omnibuses, you prefer Epic collections, that X Factor Epic collections for that stuff, grab that. If you're more of a Superman person, like you've read Death Superman, come on. So you can jump in there. The Death Return of Superman stuff. Obviously, Power Pack is in omnibus format now. Like, there's so much of her stuff is come back in print. If you're more into like detective comics, she did like 3 issues of that. Like, you can go back issue diving and snag some of that stuff. But yeah, she's an incredible talent. And if she's ever at a con that you're at, go say hi and thank her for everything.
You probably have a good experience.
Yeah.